These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the Ongoing Dehumanizing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from Chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. "You cannot discover lands already inhabited." As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. "You cannot discover lands already inhabited." As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. "You cannot discover lands already inhabited." "Suck it up," was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice, I said to the people, "You cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human." Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. "You are not welcome here," he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, a really big shoe today. We've got, in our third hour, Jimmy Tobias is going to drop by and talk about the collapse of the Red Wolves and why this actually is a much, much larger story than just some wolves. David Neiwert is going to be with us about the far-right vigilantes on the rise who are buddying up with police all over the country. This is bizarre. Chuck Collins will drop by at the bottom of our third hour to talk about an emergency billionaire tax to vaccinate the world. And at the top of the second hour, this just shocking new reporting about a couple of billionaires who made over $1 billion from Trump's tax cuts because Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, wrote a few lines of language into the tax. I'll tell you all about it in an hour. But I want to start off with Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott. This is troubling, shall we say, to say the very least. The headline of my daily rant today over at Hartmann Report, DeSantis and Abbott, will they be held responsible for mass dying of adults and children? Right now, we're seeing hospitals filling up across Florida, across Texas, and across all the states in between. And the pillars basically holding up either side of the South here, this anti-democratic, anti-Biden, pro-Trump, pro-death South, are Texas and Florida. DeSantis, or Florida and Texas, DeSantis and Abbott, respectively. And I'm hypothesizing here that they've gone all in on a high-stakes bet. And the example of Donald Trump indicates that they may well win it. And that's my main question to you today is, will they win this bet? By the way, on the op-ed over at Hartmann Report, we've enabled comments at the very bottom of the article where if you're a full subscriber to the Hartmann Report, you can comment. It keeps out, the upside is it keeps out trolls and spammers, because it's only subscribers. So, and I'm checking it every half hour or so, and I've replied to a couple of people's comments already. But here's the question. Are they going to get away with this? Killing thousands of their own citizens, tens of thousands of their own citizens, and the children's of those citizens. Killing, perhaps too strong a word. Let's say letting die. But it's not just benign neglect. I mean, they're actually taking using the force of law, using police with guns, using the power of the law to say to teachers and school administrators and parents, you will not have a safe environment in your schools. And the reason why? Because we're all following Donald Trump and his anti-mask thing that he started back in 2020 because he was afraid that if people wore masks and social distanced and stayed home, the economy would go soft and he'd lose the election. I mean, let's keep in mind where this all began, right? But this is their bet that, Donald Trump, had he, according to this study from Brookings, there was another study from the Lancet, the British Medical Journal. Deborah Birx laid this out on national television. I've got a hot link to that in my article at Hartmann Report. She just says it out loud. 400,000 Americans would not be dead if Donald Trump had simply done what, for example, Trudeau did in Canada. Everybody has to wear a mask. Everybody has to social distance. If he had just done that, 400,000 dead Americans. But you look around at the Republican Party. Is anybody blaming Trump for their dead relatives? Apparently not. And this is the bet that DeSantis and Abbott are making right now, is they're saying, you know, we're going to cause a whole bunch of people to die. And including children, by the way. The Delta variant doesn't seem to discriminate. It's no longer the boomer remover. It's now killing everybody and sickening everybody. And the bet that they're making in Florida and Texas, and then you've got the sheeple governors all in between, with the exception of John Bel Edwards in Louisiana, who's a Democrat. All these other governors. The bet that they're making is that the COVID pandemic or epidemic in those southern states is going to play out the way that diseases typically do. And that is that, the disease comes in, it's new, it whacks a bunch of people, so you have a spike in sickness and deaths, and then it spreads so far and wide that people either die or they become immune as a consequence of having had the disease, and the slope of the infection starts going back down again. We saw this with the bubonic plague in Europe. It came in waves. We saw this with, also known as the Black Death. We saw this with the flu in 1918. We see it with the flu every year in America. When we were kids, when I was a kid anyway, we saw it with chickenpox, mumps, and measles. This is, before the vaccines. We saw it in the era of George Washington with smallpox. It comes in waves. Hell, Edgar Allan Poe, there was a typhoid epidemic going on in New York City. He fled to northern New York, and he came back 2 years later when it had passed. So DeSantis and Abbott are figuring, okay, eventually enough people are going to get sick in our states. They've got, something like 30 million people in those two states that have already been infected. We're going to get enough people infected that we will achieve herd immunity, and the numbers will start going back down again, and we can claim victory. And by the way, people will forget that we had anything to do with this death and disease. And they've got several examples of Republicans who have pulled this off in the past. George W. Bush, we were talking yesterday with Spencer Ackerman about his book, Reign of Terror, about after 9/11. And he said, George W. Bush, after 9/11, the Taliban, Mullah Omar, the head of the Taliban in Afghanistan, said, we will arrest Osama bin Laden and hand him over to you. And Bush said, oh, no, I'd rather have a war. That's going to get me reelected in 2004, being a wartime president. And he started bombing the poorest country on earth, well, the second poorest country behind Burkina Faso, the second poorest country on earth, with an average annual income of $700 a year. That's how poor Afghanistan was. Bomb them back to the Stone Age? No, they were already there. And then he lied us, the next year he lied us into a war in Iraq. And our people sitting around going, hey, George W. Bush, he killed over 1 million people in the Middle East and killed thousands and thousands of American soldiers. We should think poorly of him. No, the Republicans loved George W. Bush. So it's not like there isn't precedent for Republicans getting away with this. Now, Democrats, not so much, right? People, LBJ lied us into the Vietnam War. We all know that, and we hate him for that, or at least that part of him. I mean, he did great stuff with a great society, but the Vietnam War, that was a war crime. And how do we know? Because the Vietnam Memorial. It's got those 50-some-odd thousand names etched into it. You walk by that memorial in Washington, D.C., and it's a gut punch. I've been there a couple of times. I have friends on that wall. It's an absolute gut punch. I guarantee you, there will be no such memorial with the names of the people that just like right in your face to the 600,000 people who have died in the United States, 400,000 of them at least as the direct result of Donald Trump's, I was going to say incompetence, I would say malice. So, Republicans have a long history of getting away with this kind of thing, with killing Americans, or, lying to us and being incompetent and killing Americans and just, dancing away. Trump's followers still love Trump. They're not sitting around going, hey, my friend Ralph died of this thing. He didn't have to die. No, they don't. They probably don't even know it because they live in such a well-insulated media bubble. And now it's hitting kids. The Agence France-Presse reporting from Philadelphia about a child, 10-year-old child. His symptoms were debilitating. Pain in his legs so bad he couldn't walk anymore. Gastrointestinal distress and nausea so severe he had to lie in bed. Unable to navigate the stairs. This is a healthy 10-year-old. Unable to navigate stairs, he crawled instead. When he got well enough to go to school months later, at school, basic math equations and completing homework assignments became enormously challenging for the usually A student. He describes it as a kind of confusion because he couldn't grasp basic things that he'd normally find easy to deal with. This is called long COVID. It's hitting our children with this Delta variant. The National Institutes of Health on their website at nih.gov, quote, almost half of children who contract COVID-19 may have lasting symptoms which should factor into decisions on reopening schools. Evidence from the first study of long COVID in children suggests that more than half of children aged between 6 and 16 years old who contract the virus have at least one symptom lasting more than 120 days, with 42.6% impaired by these symptoms during ongoing daily activities. Meanwhile, Carrie Eleveld over at Daily Kos writes, what can protect these children, however, is universal in-school masking for students and staff. It's been studied by Duke University researchers who tracked COVID-19 transmission in North Carolina K-12 schools across 100 school districts, 14 charter schools, 160,549 school staffers, and more than 864,000 students attending in-school instruction. Dr. Kinesia Zimmerman said, we've learned a few things for certain. This is an associate professor of pediatrics at Duke School of Medicine. Although vaccination is the best way to prevent COVID-19, universal masking is a close second. And with masking in place, in-school learning is safe and more effective than remote instruction, regardless of community rates of infection. But what do the headlines say? Well, down in Florida, the New York Post, COVID-19 cases among kids overwhelm Florida hospitals. The Daytona Beach News Journal, Florida sets COVID hospitalization records again, including highest in nation for children. In Texas, Channel 5, Dallas, full-on surge. Tarrant County leaders worry about children's health hospital capacity. CNN, baby girl with COVID-19 airlifted 150 miles because of Houston hospital bed shortage. So my question, are DeSantis and Abbott going to be able to get away with this? DeSantis just this morning doubled down. I'm going to defy President Biden. Really? You know, I would never bet that a Republican can't get away with mass killing.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Or something awful close to murder. It just, you know, it's a terrible bet. Republicans just seem to skate on this stuff. What do you think? John in Ottawa, Washington. Hey, John, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV.
Thanks for taking my call, Tom. You're doing a great job. My only thought is that, and I wish no harm to anybody, but if these governors of Florida and Texas are so committed to this no mask mandate, why don't they send their children into the COVID wards, unmasked, unvaccinated, and bring them on a picnic there?
I wonder, do you know if DeSantis or Abbott have children or grandchildren? Abbott's a little older. He's pushing 70, I think. But DeSantis is in his 50s.
I think he's referenced that he has had children. Yeah. Or has children, but maybe they're grandchildren or relatives.
I mean, Ted Cruz is out here ranting about this stuff. In fact, last night he was ranting about it on TV, how it's tyranny to require masks. Ted Cruz is sending his kids to a private children's school that charges $20,000 a year, more or less, and requires masks on all the children. That's Ted Cruz's children are protected, but he doesn't want anybody else's children protected. So, pardon the interruption, John.
No, that's fine. That was all I really wanted to say, but it just really infuriates me that these people can be so I'm searching for the words, but loss of a better word.
Hypocritical? Murderous?
Any of those, and the acronyms that follow along with them. I just really can't believe that the society has changed so much that we have this complete idiocracy, and the people that believe in this stuff. When I grew up, my dad said, if you're not telling me the truth, you're lying.
All right.
And I just, it just really infuriates me. And I thank you, Tom, for your work. I've been watching you ever since Brunch with Bernie. I think you're doing a wonderful job, and I just wish people would wake up, to use that term.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Thanks for your kind words, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Sharon in Tucson, Arizona, watching YouTube. Hey, Sharon, what's up?
Yes, good morning. I was just listening to the news this morning, and it appears that Trump is keeping control by, I have no idea why this is, hang in there to turn off the sound.
Yeah, it's always a good idea. But whenever you call in, you want to turn off your sound and listen to your phone. Anyhow, go ahead, Sharon.
Okay. This morning, the early news, we have DeSantis now going into collusion with Trump with the vaccine he was given when he was taken to Walter Reed.
You mean the not the vaccine, but the monoclonal antibodies, the remedy?
Yes.
Those actually work if you get them early enough. You've got to get them before your symptoms get really bad. And that's the problem because, doctors and hospitals, because it's like an hour-long infusion. You got to put a thing into the vein and let it drip, drip, drip. And doctors and hospitals are, when somebody comes in who's not really deadly sick, they're like, you're not really deadly sick. Go someplace else. We're full. And that would be the moment to give them the infusion to keep them from getting deadly sick. So it's one of these weird catch-22s.
Well, that's what's being pushed by DeSantis now.
Well, how can hospitals do infusions when their ER rooms are overfilling into their cafeterias? I mean, that's crazy. Sharon, thank you.
You're thinking logically.
Yeah, I know. It's a curse. It's a curse. Sharon, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Let me read a commercial over on the commercial side here, and I'll be right back in 1 minute with you. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So there's a new study that this is not peer-reviewed, but it is in preprint. It is being peer-reviewed as we speak, where the scientists were looking at the ability of the COVID virus to jump from the human species. It started with bats, and then it apparently went to pangolins and then to humans, to jump from humans to other species, which would be a big problem. If we can infect other mammals, our cats and dogs, if we can infect rats or mice, who have traditionally been disease vectors for all kinds of things, from the bubonic plague to hantavirus, if we can infect them with this virus, we've got a whole brand new problem. And sure enough, they have found that these two variants, B351 and P1, both can infect mice in the laboratory. And they say this abrogation of the species barrier represents a serious problem. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So some parents are pushing back on this. The two lawsuits were filed this morning against Ron DeSantis in Florida. The Florida Constitution requires, and I quote from the Florida Constitution, a uniform, efficient, safe, secure, and high-quality system of public schools. Notice the word safe in there? You've got parent groups that are representing parents in Alachua, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, Hillsborough, Miami-Dade, Orange, Palm Beach, and Pinellas counties, who are suing the governor saying, you are failing to provide our children with safe schools. The state, by the way, broke another record yesterday with 21,683 new cases of the virus. And by the way, did I mention the children's hospitals all across Florida, well, all across the South, are full. All the hospitals are full. Some of them are on the verge of breaking down. Rachel Maddow on her show last night on MSNBC just did a deep dive into Mississippi. Their hospitals are 4 or 5 days away from just collapsing. Because these governors are just all, hey, we're going to do like Donald Trump. We're just going to let people die and figure nobody is going to ever blame us. Republicans can get away with this, don't you know? George W. Bush lied us into 2 wars. Nobody's pissed at him. If anything, people are sitting around going, oh, no, the Taliban is taking over Afghanistan. Like the Taliban used to run Afghanistan. We shouldn't have gone in there. We shouldn't have messed with their these people call themselves freedom fighters. Why? Because they're evicting foreigners from their country. Now, I'm no fan of the Taliban. But I'm telling you, Republicans get away with making insanely stupid decisions that lead to the deaths of millions of people, including tens of thousands or thousands of Americans. And in the case of Trump and the COVID, 400,000 unnecessary deaths. According to The Lancet, according to multiple sites, according to Deborah Birx, who worked in the White House. She comes on national television and says 400,000 people died who didn't have to die, all because of Donald Trump, because of the way he responded, because he refused to have a national mask mandate and social distancing. And here we are again. So my question, are DeSantis and Abbott and all the governors in between going to get away with this? Or is history going to record them as the Stalins of their time? Stalin let millions die from famine.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
But whether you die from famine, like with Stalin, or whether you die, 400,000 people die from a deadly disease, like with Trump, you're still dead. Are they going to get away with it? Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate healthcare has convinced us that some people deserve healthcare and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer healthcare, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com.
Summer is a time for excitement, so try something new with HelloFresh.
Back in the 60s and 70s.
HelloFresh, Louise and I are trying new dish.
So are they going to get away with it? It's an open question. The comments so far over at in my post at HartmannReport.com, today's post about DeSantis and Abbott. Brad B. writes, the GOP reminds me of the abusive partner. When you confront them with their heinous acts, they respond to comments like, let's not bring up the past. Look at what you did. You're tearing this family apart. Just like that abusive partner, we need to remove them from our lives and lock them up for their crimes. They have no business running anything. And I replied, amen, Brad. And then P. Rogers says, I just can't stand this. It's infuriating. I suspect that a lot of mothers and grandmothers especially will feel the same, and it will hurt them in the midterms. It had better, and I suspect American democracy won't last. And as other democracies fail and the climate war is lost, human beings will end up as small bands of hunter-gatherers in a few isolated places in the world. And maybe that's all for the best. Maybe we should step aside and give the dolphins a chance. I don't want to live in a world that sacrifices the vulnerable for the sake of greed anyway. Well, that's a bit of a bleak outlook, but I certainly get the sentiment. I totally get the sentiment. And I ask the question, is the GOP going to use this? Are they going to win with this? How is this going to play out? Charlie in Madison, Wisconsin, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the divide in this country can be traced directly to a metastasized version of Reaganism.
Oh, of course. It all began with Reagan.
Distrust of government is at the core of what divides us. And it's, I really appreciate Biden saying, actually bringing up the trickle-down, schmickle-down comment. Mm-hmm. But what are we going to do to break out of this Reaganism that's got us all by the throat?
Yeah. I did a rant about this a couple of days ago, that this really started with, before Reagan, with the billionaires taking Lewis Powell, the tobacco lawyer, up on his advice that they start think tanks and start, basically changing public opinion, that they develop their own media structure, that they infiltrate the colleges, that they start writing op-eds for the newspapers. Now, if you plug something like, right to work, for example, or free trade into a search engine, the top 30 hits you're going to get are all right-wing propaganda. So I think it's going to take a long time to get us out of the grip of Reaganism. Kids are still writing, term papers for high school based on this stuff. It's filled.
Oh, you really got it.
Yeah, I was yesterday just trying to search, like on Wikipedia, how many Americans have died in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. It's really hard to find the numbers. I mean, it's like it's so obscure or obscured in the articles. So. Anyway, I'm not an optimist, Charlie. I do think, though, that this has the potential to blow up in the face of these Republican governors in the South. We'll see. Charlie, thank you for the call. Julie in Posen, Michigan. Hey, Julie, your thoughts?
Hi. I wear a mask when I go into stores. And a couple of times I've gotten not so nice comments from people.
Really?
And I usually I just ignore them. The last time I was in the grocery store, and it was pretty full. Well, for up here, there was like 7 people in line. And this guy made this comment to me right behind me. And I turned and looked straight at him. I said, you know what? This is not just a mask. It's an IQ test. Everybody in the store started cracking up. This guy turned beet red.
I love it. Julie, you win the Creativity Award for the day.
It made me feel so much better.
That is absolutely great. In fact, Julie, I want to send you a copy of my new book, The Hidden History of American Healthcare. It'll be out in a couple of weeks, but we've got a box of them here. And if you would like, I'll put you on hold, and Joyce can get your address and everything.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Julie, I'm going to put you on hold. Joyce, if you can hear me, Julie's on line 3. Joyce is talking to a caller right now. It may take a moment or so. Scott in Boise, Idaho. It says here you want to disagree with me, Scott. What about?
Well, I don't disagree with you. I agree with what you said, but I think you need to be consistent. You blamed Trump on 400,000 deaths from COVID, and now you're going after the governors. And I totally disagree with those governors. But you said that Trump, 400,000 people deaths based on not implementing a national mask mandate, but you didn't say anything about trying to get Biden to do a national mask mandate, and if he would be any responsible for any deaths.
There is a world of difference here, Scott. Trump went out of his way to denigrate masks, to ridicule masks, to encourage unmasked events at the White House and in public, to make fun of people wearing masks. During the election, he was making fun of Joe Biden for wearing a mask. Joe Biden has repeatedly begged people to wear masks.
National mask mandate, specifically. That's what you said. And Biden can do the same. I hope he would. I would love him to do it because everyone should be wearing a mask. I'm totally for masks.
Scott, I'll give you that.
Be consistent.
I'll give you that. Biden should do a national mask mandate. You're absolutely right. Thank you. Kevin in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind? Julie's on line 3, Joyce. She gets a book. Kevin, what's up?
You were saying that asking if the governors will get away with it, and I think they will get away with it because they never held Trump accountable for anything. I mean, you could argue that we held him accountable by voting him out, but they're passing laws all over the country to make it harder to vote. So, you know, the governors are small potatoes. I mean, this all started with Trump, and they love him even more now, a year after all this. I mean, this guy had an interview with, I think it's Bob Woodward, where before this all happened. And
in February of 2020, where he said, this is terrible, it'll kill you, it's airborne, it's worse than the flu. Yeah.
Right, and just like you were telling the previous caller, he mocked masks. He kept saying it'll go away like a miracle, don't worry about it. You know, he said, why don't we try injecting bleach? He had maskless rallies. He allowed himself to get COVID and all of his staff to get COVID. I mean, he did nothing to stop the spread of this thing. 400,000 dead, or 500 by the time that he left. And, you know, the exact same thing's playing out in these states. And it's the same playbook. You know, if you want to see a libertarian, what a libertarian paradise looks like, this is it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, but here's the question, Kevin. Do DeSantis and Abbott have the same kind of mojo or whatever, you know, magic, force of personality, charisma, BS network? I don't know what it is that Trump has. Do they have the same ability to be, you know, we used to refer to Reagan as Teflon Ronnie, right? Do they still have the same ability to have, and we were saying that when Reagan had more of the people in his administration convicted of major felonies than any president in the history of the United States. Most people don't remember that until Trump. But, you know, do they have the same ability to get away with this stuff that Trump has?
Well, I will give you that. I don't think they have the personality. I mean, Trump does have that, the personality. He's a better con man. He's a better talker.
He's been a con man his whole life. But I think you could argue that that's also true of most Republican elected officials at fairly high levels.
Yeah, Trump's a celebrity. So I think a lot of that plays into it.
There is that.
But again, they're passing all these voter laws to make it harder to vote. And I think that 2022 and 2024, I'm really scared of what's going to happen, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah.
You know, I think they'll get away with it. I mean, it's sad to say, but I think that's where I'm at right now with what I'm saying.
Yeah. I suspect that they're going to get away with it, but I think that it's entirely possible, particularly as children start dying, that they're going to face a blowback that is going to force them to bend. We'll see. We'll see. Kevin, thank you for the call. Joe in Burbank, California. Hey, Joe, your thoughts?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, Kevin's spot on with that, and I'm stealing Julie's line about the IQ test and the mask.
Yeah.
I was listening to Amy Goodman a couple days ago, and Randy Weingart was on, and she made this passing comment. You know, they're talking about this, the Abbott and DeSantis, and disregarding the mask mandate. And she said quickly, they're trying to destroy public education.
Wow.
I was floored. And
kill off the teachers? Course,
well, you know, get people to not put their kids back into school. You don't create a safe space for the schools. People homeschool, people who can afford it. put their kids in private schools like Ted Cruz, the greatest hypocrite in the Senate right now, in my opinion.
Right.
And you just slowly, like the Republicans do with everything, you slowly pull the funding and let it die and let the charter school campaign contributors make their money with charter schools.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, it really sort of mirrors what DeJoy is doing with the U.S. Postal Service.
Yeah, they just announced yesterday that starting a week from Friday, the Postal Service is going to slow down officially.
We're under attack.
Yeah, yeah. Well, America is
complete.
under attack. Yeah, and our democratic institutions. Absolutely.
Agreed.
Joe, thank you. Yeah, Randy Weingarten is thank you. She is great. She's she's been on this program many, many times. Louise and I think she was at our table for dinner when Obama took on Trump.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Gary in Alpharetta, Georgia. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Mr. Thom Hartmann.
Oh, hey, Gary. Greed has no heart.
Hi, Greed. I'm real good. I'm real good. It's I live now around where you used to live, outside Atlanta.
Yeah, we used to live in Roswell. Well, we also lived in Marietta. We lived in two different places. Yeah, yeah. You're the next town up.
Yeah, right. Well, I have to say, greed has no heart. And if you don't mind, I want to rant.
Go for it.
I have to, because it's at a level, this is pathetic behavior by our culture, and especially by the Republicans, the right-wing crazies. It's despicable. It's absolutely despicable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, tell me if you agree or disagree, because I think, bottom line, you're on definitely the same page. The bottom line is, to change that kind of behavior, you've got to treat who they are. They are hogs. And you know what you do with a hog? You hit them in the damn snout until they stop coming at you. That's the philosophy. That's what's going to have to take. And that means getting active, voting these people off, but hopefully voting will be enough. Maybe sometimes it's a combination of the two. But they are hogs about greed and power. And enough is enough. They're affecting our children.
Yeah.
Our children. I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there was a doctor on MSNBC last night who was saying, with the first couple of waves, we were holding the hands of the children of the people who were dying, and the people who were dying were in their 70s and 80s, and that was heartbreaking, but hey, they had lived a good life, and they were going to kick off in the next decade anyway. But now we are holding the hands of the parents as their teenagers and 20-year-olds and 30-year-old children are dying, and we're having to explain to their parents in their 50s and 60s that your child has died, and there is no more difficult thing that a human being can go through than to have their child die. And I'm not speaking from personal experience, but from everything I've seen, I believe that to be true.
They're hogs.
Yeah.
And they need to be called out what they are. I'm sorry. And in closing, yes, it's the right-wing Republicans, but there's too many of our fellow Americans acting out. It's saturating our culture.
Our culture is being permeated by this. It started in the 70s when the right-wing billionaires started promoting the idea that we shouldn't trust America and we shouldn't trust democratic institutions. And then Reagan actually came out and said that during his inaugural. And now we're seeing the results of this. I mean, it's just this is the clear result of 40 years of Reaganism or 50 years of billionaireism. And it has become a poison that has infiltrated our culture and our society to the point that there's like 60, 70 million Americans out there who are just totally into this stuff.
Yeah. It's not always, In closing, it's not, and you recognize what I'm saying. Thank you. It's just not. It's some of our fellow Americans. It's disgusting, and we need to challenge this.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm doing here, Gary. 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. Thank you for the call. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, telling the truth to the multinational corporations and the Republican governors that really rather you didn't know all about. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America, that a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. Just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Rick in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Hey, Tom. It's a real treat to be on the show. This is my first time. I'd like to make this comment because I don't hear it very often. I listen to the show as much as I possibly can, as well as others on WCPT in Chicago, and I don't hear this spoken of, but it really needs to be mentioned. If everything that you and I would like to achieve, progressives would like to achieve, such as social rights, justice, global warming, etc., we need to break up the people really behind it all, and that is not Republicans necessarily. They're just a tool, like a screwdriver. The actual people turning the handle on that screwdriver are these corporations.
Yeah.
We need to start, the dialogue needs to be, let's break them up like we did Howard Hughes and Standard Oil when he was threatening the Republic of Nevada back in the day.
Yep.
We need, and people need to be educated about that. You just got done talking about how a few thousand families in the South were affecting the politics of the South, and they were all about slavery for their own good. It's the same thing now on a global level, where we need to go not after the Taliban, not after dirt farmers living on the other end of the world. We're afraid of them as in the form of terrorism. It's corporations. Yeah. They only want more. They're about making money. And another thing is this. I would like to challenge all of your listeners to find one social ill that does not benefit big business, from alcoholism to cancer to global warming. They benefit from all of it.
Yeah.
It's large corporations that are behind. They're the systemic reason behind
right.
our.
If they're not driving it, they're profiting from it. They're on the tail end of the train.
From it, and my point to you is, Mr. Hartmann, I'm not trying to tell you how to run the show. That's your business. But what I am saying is, I would like to hear you speak more on how, and get guests on the show on how do we start breaking up these multinational corporations.
Rick, I am not only all over that topic. I wrote 2 books about this, The Hidden History of American Oligarchy, which is about the billionaires that these corporations have made and how they've taken over our political system, and The Hidden History of American Monopoly, which is how in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, We had people like Milton Friedman and his acolytes finally convince even the Supreme Court to change our laws to allow for monopoly. It is a serious problem, and I'm completely with you.
Hartmann.
Rick, I need to move along, but though, thank you for the call. Wayne in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Wayne, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Well, I've had some pretty dark thoughts, and among them are the main one is this. I spoke to you last week about, how many, 86% of the population not being vaccinated. Well, it dawned on me that it took us 100 years to vaccinate out of smallpox. It took us about 60 years to vaccinate out of polio. I don't think we're going to vaccinate ourselves worldwide out of this in my lifetime. I'm 78.
I don't think it took more than a decade for us to get basically rid of polio in the United States with that vaccine. But I get your point. I mean, the problem is now, as Dr. Eric Feigelding was pointing out on the program a couple of weeks ago, now this disease, this COVID-19, has jumped into like deer in Michigan and has the ability to jump into dogs and cats and things. Once it gets into a large animal reservoir, we're stuck with it forever. My point is that world. It took us in the U.S. maybe 10 years to get rid of polio, but worldwide there was enough. Polio it took decades.
Was going on for another 50 or 60.
In fact, there still is polio in the world.
A little bit, yeah. In Afghanistan, I think a few places like that. So, anyway, the conclusion I came to is that we may well be in the possibility of losing 2, 3, 4 billion people on this planet, and that may very well end global warming. Ain't going to happen in your or my lifetime, but
I don't think COVID is going to do it, Wayne. It has about a 1% fatality rate, but we are a petri dish waiting for something even worse than COVID coming along. We do have a serious overpopulation problem, and among other things, which is kind of a whole other topic, but it really does tie into this. Wayne, thank you. Stick around. We'll continue this conversation as we carry on, and you can also comment on my piece today over at HartmannReport.com. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery, by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from Chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated, waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice, I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others. as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. Let's talk for a moment about a scam that's been going on in the United States ever since the 1980s when Ronald Reagan came into office and dropped the top income tax bracket down from 74% down to 25%, and 18 times raised taxes on average working people. Did away with the tax deduction for your car loan, did away with the tax deduction for your credit card loan, added a tax to your Social Security income, added a tax to unemployment income, a whole bunch of things like this. And this has been going on. And by the way, Democrats have been playing this game as well as Republicans over the years. Although in this particular case, the Trump tax cut, this was 100% Republicans. But this is ProPublica. You know, it's a nonprofit news organization. And they somehow have gotten these IRS files. They're the ones who broke the big story last month about how of the 20 richest people in America, on average, paid between 1% and 3% income taxes, and more than half of them paid nothing in income taxes. And these are people who are making literally hundreds of millions of dollars a year, in some cases billions of dollars a year, paying no taxes whatsoever. Well, it turns out that there's a backstory to this that ProPublica lays out. And, you know, we just need to, you know, whether it's a Republican doing it or a Democrat doing it, this is something that we need to fix. In November of 2017, they're noting, as the Trump administration was pushing to get their tax cut through Congress, Senator Ron Johnson, the Republican from Wisconsin, came out and said he wasn't going to vote for it. In fact, his verbatim quote was, "If they can pass it without me, let them." Which just created, like, you know, on the GOP side, just created like, oh my God, what are we going to do? You know, because they had to pass it by reconciliation. The Democrats are not going along with this at all, and it was entirely, you know, this tax cut that 83% of all benefits went to the top 1% of Americans. But it turns out it's even worse than that. But anyhow, Ron Johnson says, I'm not going to do it. So they said, you know, well, what do you want? ProPublica writes, Johnson's demand was simple. In exchange for his vote, the bill must sweeten the tax breaks for a particular class of companies called pass-through corporations. He says they are the engines of innovation. President Trump called Senator Johnson and said, you know, we need your support. We can't pass this without your vote. And Johnson said, fine, just, you know, cut the taxes on the pass-through companies. And so Trump said, okay, fine. And he directed his legislative people to do that. Trump administration said, okay, we're going to add this tax relief for small businesses. Now, let me just read you two paragraphs from this report by ProPublica. Confidential tax records, however, reveal that Johnson's last-minute maneuver benefited two families more than almost any others in the country, both worth billions and both among the senator's biggest donors. Dick and Liz Uline of the packaging giant Uline, along with roofing magnate Diane Hendricks, together had contributed around $20 million to groups backing Senator Ron Johnson's 2016 reelection campaign. The expanded tax break that Johnson muscled through netted them $215 million in deductions in 2018 alone. At that rate, this tax cut that Ron Johnson got written into the law, apparently at their request, could deliver more than $500 million in tax savings just for the Hendricks and Yulin families over its 8-year life. But the tax break did more than just that for those two families. In the first year after Trump signed the legislation, just 82 ultra-wealthy households, these are all households worth more than $1 billion, they collectively walked away with more than $1 billion in total savings. That's $1 billion that was added to our deficit, added to our national debt. You'll recall Trump added $7 trillion to the national debt. There's $1 billion in total, and you know, this is the headline: Secret IRS files reveal how much the ultra-wealthy gained by shaping Trump's big, beautiful tax cut. And it's just rolling along. When are we going to stop doing this? When are we going to stop transferring the wealth of America's middle class, of America's working families? It's already been to the very, very rich. It's already been over that we can document, over $7 trillion in wealth since the Reagan Revolution has gone out of the homes and families and pockets and equity of working class families across America. Over $7 trillion into the pockets of fewer than about 1,000, very, very, very wealthy families and big corporations in America. Isn't it time for America to say enough already? I'm just, it's like I am completely over this, and I hope you are too. And I think we need to start pushing our politicians on this. Okay, let me pick up some of your phone calls. We continue our conversation about, what we were bringing up in the previous hour. Are they going to get away with this down south? TJ in Jacksonville, Florida. Hey, TJ, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Well, Ron DeSantis was here in Jacksonville today and, released a little press release or something about he's going to offer mobile, what do you call them?
Vaccination?
Monoclonal treatments for COVID-19 patients.
Right.
Okay? So he's going to have a little van, like one of those blood mobiles that's going to show up for COVID patients. And then he'll put them on the bus, and they'll give them the IV. That's what he says he's going to do. Well, first of all, that treatment is only emergency use only.
Right.
It is not for severe COVID patients.
Correct.
Okay, so what you have then. But also what you have is you have to have in order to qualify, the person has to, number one, already have been tested and found to be infected,
right.
And number two, either be mildly or mild or moderate symptoms of COVID. Well, okay, fine. So put them on the bus, give them the treatment, give them the IV, and then what? Send them home?
Well, yeah. I mean, apparently this works. I mean, it's what Donald Trump did. It's what Chris Christie did. It's what Rudy Giuliani did. It saved all their lives.
Yeah, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not a magic bullet.
Well, it's very effective. But here's the thing, TJ. You had 32,800 new cases in Florida yesterday. Diagnosed,
right?
Which means you probably had twice as many cases because those were the people that were sick enough to show up and say, "I feel terrible. Tell me what I've got." Right?
Right.
And we know that a significant percentage, probably somewhere between 20 and 50% of people who get this disease don't even know that they have it or they think they've got a cold. So you've got. If you're going to do mobile buses with monoclonal antibodies, which is a half hour to an hour infusion.
He's only going to do one.
He's got one bus? He showed up in Jacksonville with one bus? And you got 32,000 people a day who are sick enough that they're showing.
That's what I'm saying, is that this is not even, it's a typical, we're not really going to do anything, but it sounds good, doesn't it?
Why doesn't he show up? If he's going to send buses into communities, into neighborhoods, why doesn't he send buses with vaccines?
Good idea. But no, that's not what he's going to do. Also, I want to remind you something. I know you know everything about Saint Reagan. But Ronald Reagan is who turned medicine into a business. Ronald Reagan said, we're going to let the doctors and the medical people do what they do best, and we're going to send business people in to take care of the business end of medicine. That's when medicine became for-profit. Greed is good.
There you go. TJ, we're out of time.
Thom Hartmann Program.
Yeah. St. Ronnie strikes again. It's 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back, Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I think the Republicans are going to get away with it just from the track record of the Democrats rolling over and playing dead since Reagan. And let me make a quick prediction. Not only are they going to get away with it, they're going to pass this cheap infrastructure bill. They're going to kill the expensive one. And then in the midterms, they're going to run a bipartisanship infrastructure bill that they help pass.
I believe that that's their strategy, Mark. Whether they'll pull it off, I mean, you've got the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the House that's saying you're not going to get our vote unless it's both.
Let's hope they stick to that.
Yeah. They're going to have to. And, you know, Greg Sargent wrote a great piece about this in the Washington Post yesterday, and I was ranting about it yesterday as well, that, you know, right now, and President Biden is all in on this. You know, he's saying, yes, let's do both. It's a two-track process. We can make this happen. So, you know.
Yeah, but you got to get Manchin and Sinema along, and Republicans are sucking up to them big time.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And as are the big donors, but Manchin and Sinema have staked their reputation now on this $1 trillion, you know, bipartisan bill. And if they can't get that through, that's a big loss for them. That's almost a humiliation for them. And if the progressives hold tight in the House, they're going to say, yeah, you know, Manchin and Sinema, we'll give you what you want. And Republicans, you know, there's dozen or so Republicans who went along with this. We'll give you what you want. We'll give you this legislation that's got, you know, all this public-private partnership and the subsidies of the for-profit energy companies and the subsidies of the for-profit broadband companies and whatnot like that. We'll give you all that, and you've got to give us the $3.5 trillion that's actually going to green our infrastructure so we can start reducing our carbon footprint and get out from underneath these, you know, 103-degree days like we're having here in Portland, which is...
I hope you're right,
yeah.
But I'm skeptical that that'll happen.
Yeah. Well, I share your skepticism, but I'm still hoping. I am still hoping.
I keep hope too, Tom, but it's fading.
Yeah, there you go. We'll see. We'll see. You know, we got a couple of weeks here, Mark. Mark, thank you for the call. Brian in Shreveport, Louisiana. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
Hey, what's on my mind is... I'm tired of hearing how confused Americans are when they call into the radio show. They're saying, "Oh, why are these people like this? Why are these people not getting vaccinated?" And I think the answer is really in our history, and that is understanding Confederate culture. Confederate culture says, "Look, whatever those Yankees say, we're not going to do." And the modern Yankee today would be your Democrats or your liberals. And those be your, you know, with the N word, they would call you the N lovers. That's all too. They're just whatever we say. If the Democrats say left, they're gonna say right because they're Republicans. But they're a huge part of that party is Confederate in their mindset. That's why they were okay with the evil and cruel things that Trump did, like separating families, taking children away from their parents. That goes back to slavery. That's nothing new there. They just shrug their shoulder and try to giggle about it. Yeah. And so now you got over and over again. Now they're like anti-vax, but it's like you're saying. I think in the long run, it's going to affect them in a big way if their children start to actually suffer behind the choices.
So far they had been, lucky is not the right word, but the fact that it was only killing older people had been something that allowed them to minimize it. Now that it's killing children and young people, healthy young people, I think the whole equation changes, and I think DeSantis and Abbott are behind the curve on this. We'll see, though. Brian, thank you. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma, a serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour, and Jose in Toledo, Ohio. Hey, Jose, what's up?
Hey, well, I was just watching the show, and I was going to comment on the gentleman that made the statement that education is despicable behavior in Florida and Texas. But the reality has been, and for a long time, but why would the elite want an actually educated proletariat or working class? Why would they want them to understand the trends and the movement of history? Because, that would give them something to think about.
Good point.
There's no way they want education to work.
Yeah.
They just want a bunch of dummies that show up to work and cash their paycheck and go back next week.
Excellent points, Jose. And I think that a lot of that you can find back, when Bill Bennett was running the education department under Reagan, and they started not just dialing back on civics in schools or eliminating civics in public schools across America. Thus, we have, two basically politically and history of America illiterate generations as a consequence. But also just dialing back on funding for schools. We stopped building new schools in the 80s. We didn't have the money anymore. You drop your top tax rate from 74% down to 25%. And impose austerity, you're just not, and that's why everybody's talking about infrastructure right now. We've had 40 years where the entire burden of infrastructure, repairing roads and everything else, has been on the states, and the federal government, outside of a little bit, the piddling money from the highway, or the gas tax, everything else has just been dumped on the states. So, I think you're right. Thank you very much for the call.
I started writing children's books that promote civic education for little bitty kids. The idea of democracy and voting. I just came out with one. Unfortunately, COVID kind of shot me in the knees on that. But
yeah, is there a website where people can find those, Jose?
I have a website called Dove and Flight Press.
You want to spell it?
And DOVINFLIGHT.press.
Got it. Okay, Jose. I hope you get some hits. Thank you very much for the call, Lewis in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Lewis, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. With Republicans like DeSantis and Greg Abbott banning mass mandate and Republicans spreading disinformation on vaccines, how can we get Democrats to get up there in unison, right? And start saying the Republicans are trying to kill our kids. They're trying to infect our kids with COVID. Like how can we convince Do you think you can
I think people are just watching the news and going, "Holy cow, this is not right."
Yeah, but they're not doing it. Like, do you think that if you talk to Ro Khanna, that he can convince them to start saying it like over and over in the news and make that their next talking point to put Republicans on the defensive?
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. He's not on the show tomorrow. Oh, he is? Oh, he'll be with us tomorrow. So maybe somebody will ask him. I'm sure the topic will come up. Louis, thank you for that. Michael in Fresno, California. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
I'd like to know why that they don't call these governors and everything. They're causing all these deaths, and they're known there are. What's the difference between the fascist Nazis in Germany, where they're doing the same thing, what they're doing to the people in this country, but they're all our own citizens?
Well, there's a big difference, Michael. What the Nazis did was identify specific groups of people: Jews, gays, socialists. They identified specific groups of people for extermination. I don't think that you can draw a comparison to what Abbott and DeSantis are doing. They're going after the public schools. You've got all kinds. I mean, every pediatric hospital in Texas and Florida right now is overwhelmed with children with COVID, and they're trying to say, no, you can't wear masks in school, which will prevent the transmission of COVID. It's just that simple. I mean, nobody is stupid enough to say, I'm going to go into the hospital, but I don't want the surgeon to wear a mask when he operates on me, right? Nobody's that stupid. But there are apparently people who think that kids who can spread COVID to each other and then take it home and whack their parents with it, or whack people who are immune compromised or can't even get a vaccine. Apparently, that kind of stupid lives in Florida and Texas. And but I don't think it's going to last. I think both these governors are going to have to give in and say, if our schools want to have all the kids wear masks in order to protect each other and to protect the teachers, we're going to go along with it. I mean, Kay Ivey has done that, by the way, in Alabama?
Yes.
Yeah. So Kay, and she's a Republican governor, and she said, that was a terrible mistake. Shouldn't have done that. And so it's just the question is when. When are they gonna back off from this? I don't know the answer. Michael, thank you for the call. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls. Actually, we've got a guest here. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Chuck Collins is on with the latest tax scam right after the break, and then we'll be picking up your calls. So hang on.
Our book for the book report today. Is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhuburi. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the Civil Rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, a lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith, end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof stated his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets.
For sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Of course, at HartmannReport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at HartmannReport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at ThomHartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at HartmannReport.com and ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. On the line with us is Chuck Collins, a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies, the director of the Institute for Policy Studies program on inequality and the common good, and the co-editor of inequality.org. He's also the author of a new book, The Wealth Hoarders. IPS-DC.org is the website. You can tweet him at IPS_DC or Chuck9921, T-O-1. Chuck, welcome back to the program. We have a worldwide crisis. We're talking here in the United States about trying to vaccinate America, and we're having our own challenges with that. But the fact of the matter is, here in the United States, we have enough vaccine to vaccinate every single person without a problem. In fact, vaccines are being wasted and spoiled. They're going out of date all across the South right now. But if we don't vaccinate, one of the rationales that's being given is we need to vaccinate Americans to stop new variants from emerging. But if we don't vaccinate the world, the new variants are inevitable. So what do we do?
Well, one proposal, and part of it is we've been looking at what's happening to billionaire wealth globally as well. And what we just, together with Oxfam, Fighting Inequality Alliance, we put out a report today that shows that the billionaire class, the 2,690 billionaires globally, have seen their wealth go up $5.5 trillion during the pandemic.
Whoa!
Their wealth went up. More than the previous 15 years, since 2006. So our proposal, is to levy a emergency pandemic windfall wealth tax, a 99% tax on this segment, this very small, under 3,000 individuals. We could vaccinate the world and have trillions of dollars left over to provide other forms of COVID relief to help rebuild the global economy. So that's one question. Is if anybody's worried about where the money is, we can tell you where it is.
I guess so. How does that translate to the United States?
The U.S., we have 714 billionaires in the U.S., and their wealth has gone up almost $2 trillion over this same 17 months. So,
So a little less than half of this is happening just here in the U.S.
Yeah. The U.S., China, and a few European countries have easily almost half the global billionaires. Mm-hmm. And again, this is a group that's, they haven't gotten smarter. They haven't gotten more innovative during the pandemic. They have benefited essentially from having their competition shut down, from a marketplace that's betting that they're going to consolidate their economic power going forward. And their gains have just surged while others have lost their lives and livelihoods. So we think a clawback tax provision is a really good idea. And incidentally, Tom, it would leave this global billionaire group, they'd still have $55 billion more than they did at the beginning of the pandemic.
Wow. So you're not even talking about taking all of it.
It's 99%. It seems.
Well, this is just the profits that they made during the pandemic. $5.5 trillion, $5-point-something trillion.
Yeah, basically they started the pandemic as a global group with about $8 trillion. Their wealth went up to $13.5 trillion in 17 months.
Breathtaking. That's breathtaking. And the wealth of average Americans, of course, declined, and we've got millions of fewer jobs. And so, Chuck, for people who want to know more about this, and actually, before I get to that, are any of the politicians of the world talking about this? I mean, if you're talking about a global system here, this would have to at least originate with the UN, I would think, or at least a consensus among the developed countries of the world. Is anybody taking this seriously?
Well, we're calling upon national governments that obviously have the ability to institute such taxes. And several countries, Argentina levied an emergency wealth tax during the pandemic. A number of other countries, it's currently being debated. Senator Bernie Sanders proposed it about a year ago, just looking even at the first year of the pandemic and the trillion plus that went to U.S. billionaires. He proposed a 65% U.S. one-time wealth tax to help pay for COVID relief. So it's an idea that's being out there. And I think the idea of our report is, look, this really strikes a nerve. People know, that the wealthy have done well during the pandemic, but they have really no idea how rich the rich have gotten while everyone else's prospects have dimmed. So I think part of releasing this study is to help build support within national governments to levy wealth taxes. And you've written about this during times of war and national emergencies and the like. We've had emergency taxes and windfall taxes. So it's truly there's a historical precedent for.
Yeah, we did it during the Civil War.
These.
We did it during World War I. We did it during World War II.
Yep.
Yeah, it's arguably we did it during Vietnam. Chuck Collins, a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies. His new book is The Wealth Hoarders. What's the best website, Chuck, for more information on this or for people who want to support what you're doing?
Yeah, check out inequality.org. That is a website of the Institute for Policy Studies, but it's where you can learn more about sort of the inequality work and campaigns that people can plug into and some of the data and also the good news, how people are responding to try to reverse these extreme inequalities.
Great. Thank you. Inequality.org. We will check it out. Chuck, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's great talking with you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Keep up the great work. You're doing God's work there. Chuck Collins with inequality.org. Be sure to check out the website. So let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Carl in Napa, California. Hey, Carl, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. So my question is this. As I hear your callers talk about multinational corporations, and I work for a multinational corporation. Separately, I'm also a licensed clinical psychologist. Separately, I'm also a vet. Since I was a vet, I haven't felt as proud to work for a place that I have now since I work for a large multinational corporation. My question, is it possible that the role of multinational corporations, which emphasize diversity and inclusion, just all of the principles that are important to me, if Trump had been elected, my allegiance would be to that multinational corporation. And I'm just curious what you see as the future unfolding, not only of the role of these major multinational corporations. Tom, when I'm on a group call across the world, there's none of the baloney about, vax logic or any of this silly divisive stuff in America. So what do you see as the future of multinational corporations to increasingly emphasize their social responsibility piece? And they're doing it increasingly well.
Yeah, large corporations are really doing a good job and in the forefront of, diversity training and sensitivity and trying to hire, diverse workforces and things like that. And that's, generally speaking, a good thing. On the other hand, and there's nothing wrong with companies doing business across national borders. The problem comes when they start behaving in a monopolistic fashion, when they are predatory, when they are destructive of competition. And, that's really a whole different thing. Then you're getting into the realm of monopoly. But I'm not sure specifically what your question was, Carl, other than to praise the company you're working for.
Well, they are a great company. But was somebody on your call had said democracy versus capitalism? And I really have been wrestling with that in my head. And I think I don't know that.
Well, democracy is a political system and capitalism is an economic system.
But if you pose that question to a Republican and let them pick a side, I don't see that being as problematic.
They will always pick capitalism. Actually,
they will always pick capitalism.
Right.
And so I'm saying, is there a future where major multinational corporations step up and say, stop? I don't know what's going on in America, but this is insanity. Like if we go back to our offices,
it's expected we'll be grown-ups. We'll be vaccinated, and we'll wear a mask.
You see this with a lot of the European corporations, particularly the ones out of Northern Europe. And part of it might be, and Germany, for example. You know, in Germany, they wrote into their constitution after World War II that any corporation with more than 1,000 employees, their board of directors has to be 50% made up of people who are who work in those factories, who are union members. So the union basically has half of the board of directors of every major German corporation. And so those corporations tend to behave in a much more socially responsible fashion. You see similar things, not exactly like that, but you see similar things in the Scandinavian countries. So, you know, I don't know where your corporation is based, but, you know, if it's a multinational. Say what?
Germany.
Yeah, Germany. There you go. You know, so that has an awful lot to do with it. It kind of sets and defines the corporate culture. Carl, I got to run, but thank you for the call. 45 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where smart people get their news. Back right after this. And welcome back. Jesus in McAllen, Texas. Hey, Jesus, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'm calling today, and greetings from McAllen, Texas.
Thank you.
Yes, I guess COVID is on my mind this morning, afternoon actually. So here in McAllen, in Hidalgo County, a number of new cases has gone up northwards of 1,000%. Number of cases is in the double digits as of today. And we're about to start school as of Monday. And we have our governor preventing school districts from making local decisions as far as mask mandates, as you well know. Mm-hmm. My concern is because we're starting to have our local school districts here challenge the governor and suing for the right to make local decisions and institute mask mandates. But my concern is even with mask mandates, I don't know if you've been in a school cafeteria or in the hallways of the school.
Yeah, you know, I grew up I went to public schools. Sure.
And it's going to be virtually impossible to maintain any kind of physical distancing.
Right.
And
which makes masks even more important, Jesus.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I'm saying that even with a mask mandate, these kids are going to have to remove their mask at some point to eat. And these are enclosed spaces. And these kids haven't seen each other for over a year. They're gonna hug. They're gonna do things that we can't control.
Yeah.
And as contagious as this COVID-19 is, this Delta variant, I wonder if we're going to close up those schools.
Oh, I give it 2 weeks, which is about how long it takes for somebody to go from exposure to really sick. Exactly.
And at Texas, as you all know, we're already in dire straits here. Mm-hmm. We have our governor bringing in doctors and nurses from all other states.
Yeah, DeSantis has just got 300 ventilators from the federal government for Florida. Exactly. And in Texas, you got Governor Abbott begging doctors and nurses from the rest of the country to come down there, but he still won't allow children to wear masks in schools. This is insane. I mean, this is like a clinical definition of insanity.
Yes, sir. And the other point that I wanted to make, and you kind of stole my thunder with your wonderful question, is that even if we put off starting school, because that would be my suggestion. But even if we do that, these viruses, just like climate change, they don't respect borders.
Yep.
We're going to have another variant come out unless we vaccinate the world. This is not going to end.
Yeah, we have to vaccinate the world, and that gets us into these TRIPS waivers and things like that. In fact, I need to mention that briefly on the other side of this break. Jesus, thank you very much for the call. It's always nice to hear from you.
Tom.
Appreciate it. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So Rand Paul is now echoing Louis Gohmert. Remember Louis Gohmert back in the day, back in the after 9/11, when he was talking about terror babies? There's Muslims coming to the United States to have babies who will be citizens, and we can't kick them out anymore, and then they're going to grow up and they're going to be terrorists. Yeah, and we all kind of laughed at Louis Gohmert. So now Rand Paul is talking about how the Biden administration is taking kids from down at the border who may have it, COVID, and they're plucking them up and putting them all over the United States as if they're wishing to seed the country with a new variant. Right. But that's not half of it. Then he goes on to say that, for him, quote, the bottom line for those who are saying I won't go to a restaurant unless everybody's vaccinated, he says, mind your own business. Well, Rand, it is our business. Public health is all of our businesses. I've got a whole new rant about Rand Paul's bizarre take on the public good over at ThomHartmann.com. It's a video. You can check it out there. By the way, one other thing that I wanted to add is two things that I just want to toss into the mix for our conversation here, and then back to your phone calls. Number one, I'm assuming most of you have probably seen on the news the pictures out of Tennessee, I believe it was, maybe Kentucky, but I'm pretty sure it was Tennessee. I mix those two states up all the time in my head, where there was a bunch of guys who looked like neo-Nazis, basically, screaming at school board members, we know who you are, we know where you live. Guys with tattoos on their necks and shaved heads. And the media says parents are upset. I don't think these people are parents. I think they're Nazis. I think they're Trumpies. And, and I think somebody in the media needs to look into this, number one. And number two, if we're going to vaccinate the world, there's a very easy way to do it without taxing the billionaires, although I'm all in favor of that. And that is to pass these so-called TRIPS waivers, which every country in the world is in favor of except Germany. And Germany is holding it up because the UN operates on consensus. One country says no, that kills the whole thing. It's not the UN is not majority rule. It's consensus. And consensus means everybody in or nothing happens. And the TRIPS waivers would say to companies like AstraZeneca and Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and Moderna, we're going to let vaccine factories in third world countries manufacture your vaccine. And they are going to pay you a royalty for your vaccine. You're not only not going to lose money, you're going to make some money. It's just that royalty is going to be a few cents per shot rather than $50 per shot or whatever it is. And every country in the world wants to go along with this except Germany. And we've had several conversations with Lori from Ralph Nader's Citizen.org, Global Trade Watch, tradewatch.org, I guess is the website. We need to do it. Nancy in Minneapolis. Hey, Nancy, thanks for listening to KTNF. What's up?
So I'm a nurse in Minneapolis in a hospital with COVID. So I've been living with this in the belly of the beast for over a year and a half. And I get so irritated with Florida and all these other states that aren't following. But there's a law. We have a public health law. And one section that really stuck out to me was, so it's Title 42, Section 70.2, which is titled Measures in the Event of Inadequate Local Control. And it's saying that states need to have control over this pandemic. Otherwise, the CDC can say this needs to stop. So we need to follow the law. And I would like to see...
Nancy, if I so I clearly understand what you're saying. You're saying that there's a federal law that says that if a state fails to protect their citizens in a public health emergency, the federal government can step in. Is that the essence of what you're saying?
Yes,
okay.
That's right. The CDC can take over. And I think that Florida should be quarantined. I think we need to border that place off and say nobody goes in except for essential supplies and nobody gets out. And you will hear places like Disney screaming like a scorched cat as soon as you start doing that. So you got to hit the commerce. But I'm not a lawyer. There are penalties, though, for allowing a pandemic just to go on, and we've got to follow the law.
Not to mention the penalty of dead children and adults all across the country.
Exactly.
Yeah. Nancy, thank you. That was brilliant. I appreciate your
you.
feedback, and I really appreciate the information. Tess in Denver. Hey, Tess, we have a little more than a minute left. What's this hour? What's up?
Yeah. Hey, to echo what the previous caller was saying, like, what are the penalties? You know, like, at what point is it criminal for people in positions of authority and power? We know how much people are just believe people who are in positions of authority. Look at the Milgram experiment. We know that, like, you know, so at what point does it become, you know, does their negligence and their lies and their misinformation that is literally killing people, at what point is that criminal, or are there repercussions? I mean, I wasn't under the impression that free speech meant we could, you know, spew lies and manipulate people in ways that threaten their life. I didn't know that that's what they meant by free speech when they wrote the Constitution. So I'm just confused about...
Yeah, well, Tess, a lot's going to depend on local prosecutors or on people who are the victims of this. I mean, you know, the whole libertarian ideology is you can solve all problems with the courts. Well, somebody whose kid died of COVID in Florida or Texas needs to be suing the governor of those states for wrongful death. And if a prosecutor wants to pick it up and add a criminal charge to it, you know, good on them.
Has any of that happened yet?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Anywhere?
Not to the best of my knowledge. And I think that there are 400,000 Americans who should have the ability to sue Donald Trump for that, although there is this thing called sovereign immunity, which makes it damn near impossible to sue a public official. But, you know, there have to be reasonable limits to that. Tess, thank you for the call. I share your outrage, and you expressed it very, very well. Thank you so much for the call. We'll be back with the third hour of our program. What a fascinating day, huh? David Neiwert is going to be with us right after the break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Edward Nell's new book, Progress and Poverty in Economics. The subtitle, Henry George and How Growth in Real Estate Contributes to Inequality and Financial Instability. This is from the introduction, which is subheaded, Reviving the Work of America's Most Original Economist. Andrew Mazzone and I collaborated on a project to review the work of the 19th century American economist Henry George, especially his landmark book, Progress and Poverty, 1879, to see how George's work stood up in the light of modern economics and to determine what could be brought up to date and applied to the contemporary world. We wanted to establish that George's work was relevant and also to criticize American academics, economists for having overlooked or rejected George both in his own time, when his work was a worldwide sensation, and afterward, even today. Andrew died suddenly in the middle of the project. This book is a tribute to him and completes what we began. George began his career as an author and public personality with Progress and Poverty, arguing that progress brought poverty in its wake and that poverty might even outpace progress, an important original point of view that has not lost any of its relevance since George's time. In fact, in our age of burgeoning inequality, it may be more relevant today than ever before. The grounds for this paradoxical interlinking of progress and poverty lay in the effect of rising rents. For George, rents were payment, not for the use of land in the usual sense, but for pure access to specific places and locations. But why should some people have the right to limit others' access to the use of the earth? Surely it belongs to us all. Worse, the limiting of access by demanding payment would undermine the benefits of innovation and hard work. To prevent this linking of progress and poverty, George said a major policy shift in taxation was required. This is well known among economists as the Georgist single tax on rents, or the Henry George theorem. Since George's time, there has been progress both in the economy itself and in economic analysis. The economy has been growing, and growth models have become highly sophisticated, in many cases focusing on matters that were central to George a century earlier. But that progress has also led to poverty, obvious in the economy itself. Our mainstream economics is also poverty-ridden, stricken. Our analytical models do not explain the persistence of poverty very well, nor do they account for crises and crashes, let alone the recent and stubborn growth of inequality. The mainstream theory of income distribution, marginal productivity, which assumes diminishing returns for all these factors of production and the markets will coordinate their adjustment. Distribution is hopelessly flawed. George rightly rejected an early version of it. And contemporary economic theory has almost completely lost sight of rents and real estate, even though real estate was center stage in the global financial crisis of 2008, a crisis directly resulting from speculation in the housing market. And in 2016, Donald Trump, a real estate developer whose rise to power is intimately linked to rents and real estate speculation, was elected president. With a solid Republican majority in Congress, he began to implement a set of relentlessly regressive trickle-down economic policies that can be expected to lead to more poverty among vast segments of the population. Andrew and I wanted to find insights and tools in George's thought to counter this trend, to support progress and alleviate poverty. Before Andrew died, we had settled on 5 main points in George's writing that we wanted particularly to explore. 1, George emphasized cooperation as well as competition in regard to increasing productivity. He saw that the division of labor and cooperation as settlements developed on new land created value in location and generated increases in output while bringing about innovation. This is what generated the differentials on which rent is based, as we will explain. Number 2, George and his followers claimed that the total value of land in a region would tend to equal the value of the aggregate output of that region. 3, further, they claimed that total rents would tend to equal the costs of government, so that taxing rents would pay for government. And number 4, they contended that unless prevented by an activist government, inequality in wealth and income, roughly between the upper and lower classes, but also between other significant groups, would tend to rise inexorably. And number 5, and finally, George repeatedly attacked land speculation and its tendency to withdraw land from productive use and to promote concentration, a point that seemed to, that seemed to both Andrew and myself to have a direct bearing on today's world. Only today it's not land alone, but finance generally that is subject to speculative excesses. I wrote up notes on theory while Andrew worked on rents, cost of government, land values, and GNP. I eventually put our notes together into 2 more or less finished articles to present at the annual conference of the Eastern Economics Association in New York City. Economists have given George short shrift, which is a shameful oversight. He has much to teach us. He was uniquely American, perhaps our greatest economist, certainly our most original. He is justly famous and heralded in the 19th century, and his book Progress and Poverty, which is the source for much of our analysis on these pages, was the best-selling book on economics of that entire century. The book Progress and Poverty in Economics by Edward Nell.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is David Neiwert. He is an investigative journalist with Daily Kos, the author of Red Pill, Blue Pill, How to Counteract the Conspiracy Theories That Are Killing Us, and another book, Alt America, The Rise of the Radical Right in the Age of Trump, dailykos.com or dneiwert, Neiwert.blogspot.com. And David Neiwert, or at Daily Kos on Twitter. David, welcome to the program. Thank you for this extraordinary piece about the far-right vigilantes and their symbiotic relationship with basically, I believe this is the Border Patrol or ICE or both. Tell us about this.
Well, so these border vigilantes, which are basically fundamentally a patriot movement sort of thing, have been around for quite a long time, since around early 2000. And a lot of folks remember, hopefully, the Minutemen, which was one of the sort of original versions of these. Mm-hmm. were very much also, representatives of the patriot movement. And even back in 2005, which is when the Minutemen were at their peak, it was fairly clear for those of us who were down on the border reporting on this that the Border Patrol had a very friendly relationship with these folks. They definitely looked the other way whenever they were doing their thing, and we're all too happy to have them turn in immigrants for them to pick up and haul off to the cooler. But now it's really become kind of explicit, and this is something that actually Southern Poverty Law Center uncovered. Freddie Cruz, their reporter, did an excellent piece talking, really showing how the Border Patrol just explicitly has a relationship with these guys, and they are very friendly, even though a lot of them, like the guys in down near El Paso on the New Mexico border last year, who were pulling aside immigrants and detaining them, wound up in prison because they were toting weapons and representing themselves as border patrolmen.
Now, if you read any history of the United States from the failure of Reconstruction with the election of 1876 right up to the 1960s, what you find is that in many parts of the country, particularly in the South, there was a symbiotic relationship between Klan members and local police. And very often what happened was the Klan members would do the things that the police could not do under cover of law. They would harass people, they would torture people, they would kill people, they would terrorize people. And then the police would come in and kind of clean up after the fact and provide a legal patina to it and maybe even cover it up. This is the main reason why historically in America we have looked askance, shall we say. We have viewed poorly professional police agencies aligning themselves with unprofessional civilian paramilitary groups. Is that same kind of dynamic what's happening down at the border?
Well, it's happening not just at the border, of course, but I think in police departments across the nation. And, of course, this gets into another area that I cover, which is they're dealing with the Proud Boys and these far-right street brawlers. Police are very friendly. But, yeah, the Border Patrol in particular has become fundamentally a rogue, out-of-control law enforcement agency. They are, ridiculously overfunded, ridiculously overstaffed, and they have a huge amount of power. And basically, they feel a great amount of impunity. This Border Patrol also is very, very closely aligned with Donald Trump. The Border Patrol Union was rabidly pro-Trump. I'm almost surprised they haven't taken to claiming that Biden cheated to win the election, but they are they of course immediately jumped on Joe Biden as president and claimed that they were part of the faction that was claiming that Biden was messing up on the border and was creating a crisis on the border, which of course is actually ridiculously overrated. But
well, I recall too, David, that correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my recollection is that when Trump sent federal troops into Portland, and also some of the stuff around Washington D.C., like clearing Lafayette Square, that he was using Border Patrol agents basically as his own private shock, stormtroopers, his own little SS cadre. Am I misremembering that?
Not quite. They're actually private contractors for the DHS, which of course CBP is part of, and they had traditionally done the contract work with Border Patrol. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what do we? Is the Biden administration taking any of this seriously, or are they just hands off on this?
Right now, it's hard to tell. I mean, supposedly there's this initiative underway to weed the extremists out of the ranks of law enforcement, both in on the federal level as well as and in the military, right? But there's been a tremendous amount of pushback on it. A lot of claims that they are making, that it's politically biased stuff, and the problem is that they, nobody wants to really fess up to the real dynamic that's going on here, which is that so many of these Border Patrolmen, as well as I think so many policemen, have become themselves politicized over the last 10 years, and not just politicized, but radicalized. A lot of them now believe these right-wing conspiracy theories. A lot of them believe Donald Trump's disinformation. And, I think that when you have that situation, in law enforcement, it's really a problem because, you've got at least half of the population that they are fundamentally biased against.
Yeah. Yeah, we used to have Sheriff Mack used to come on this. Richard Mack used to come on our program
I know
years
Richard
ago.
Mack.
Yeah, and he was one of the Oath Keepers. He was one of the big guys in the Oath Keepers, and they would talk about we don't recognize the federal government, blah blah blah. Although we're keeping the oath, but he described to us a decade ago on this program in detail how they were infiltrating police departments all over the United States and other military organizations, the Border Patrol, the various state militias, it's like it kind of created a perfect storm when Trump came into office. Is there anything that individual citizens, the people who are listening or watching this program right now, can do to make their voices heard about their disgust of about this affiliation between, right-wing white supremacist paramilitary groups and the Border Patrol?
Well, I will say that there is a ridiculous amount of tolerance in the voting public for sheriffs who are CSPOA members. So that's Richard Mack's organization, the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association.
Right.
And yeah, there's a ridiculous amount of tolerance for it. It's like people just go kind of shrug and say, oh, you know, it's constitutional. It's all wrapped in a flag. Must be okay.
Right.
Right. But that's not okay. CSPOA is an extremely radical organization that fundamentally tells sheriffs that they are laws unto themselves.
I know. It's been a long time since we had Richard on because it was over the top.
Government. Yeah. And they, well, and of course the Oath Keepers and, you know, CSPOA philosophy is what the Oath Keepers use. Of course, that's Stuart Rhodes' organization.
Right.
And as we know, the Oath Keepers played a central role in the January 6th insurrection.
Right.
And Stuart Rhodes is very much a target of federal prosecutors right now, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any federal prosecutors who are looking at this thing, you know, at this association going on down at the border?
No, I don't think there is. That's why I think Haywatch's reporting is so valuable.
Yeah.
Because they really substantiated what we've long suspected.
Yeah.
That, you know, there was this cozy relationship going on, and you know, and now it just seems like, you know, post-Trump, or even during the Trump years, everything just went mask off. Everybody's just said, "Oh, I don't have to put up the pretense of plausible deniability anymore." You know,
right.
We'll just go ahead and say, "Yeah, we love the border militias, you know, border vigilantes. They're great. They're our friends." But that's pretty much how they treat it.
We have a lot of work to do. David Neiwert, dailycoz.com, DNEIWERT.blogspot.com, on Twitter, David Neiwert, and at Daily Coz as well. David, thanks for dropping by, and also your book, Alt America and Red Pill, Blue Pill. Great work. Thank you so much. Oh, he's gone.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. I see I have a bunch of SiriusXM callers on the board. I will be picking up your calls as soon as SiriusXM is back live again. Right now, Helena in Vancouver, Washington, watching us live on Free Speech TV. Hey, Helena, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I would like to respond to a caller that was putting down Democrats for not demanding from Biden national mandate, mass mandate,
right,
in the same way that we were condemning and putting Trump down for not doing so.
Right.
And you kind of agreed with him. I completely don't. It kind of makes me upset.
Okay, tell me why.
And it's because right now we have a completely different environment that was created by Republicans alone. Trump had like in the beginning, of COVID, Trump had entire nation on one page. And there were no angry, misinformed, disgusted mobs, at that time that were spitting on people, yelling on people, threatening them for not wearing masks. There was no political war over masks. And, I kind of see this, I'm quite visual, so I kind of see this as Trump at that time, he could swim the ocean because the ocean was completely nice and calm. Biden, for another, on the other hand, right now there's a hurricane on the ocean with monsters that are in frenzy, and we tell him to swim. I think that the caller was extremely manipulative. If Biden would put this mandate right now, it would just
it would blow up in his face.
Yeah, it would. It would add another quote reason, for the repeat of January 6th. That would be just another. It would create some type of a, war. So.
Yeah. I'm guessing, though, Helena, that our caller would say, oh, so you're saying don't do it because you're afraid of them?
Not that we are afraid of them. It's, like I said, you don't go and swim in the ocean when there is a hurricane.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't do it, just do it in a different way.
Yeah, and I think that that's largely what the Biden administration is doing. They're encouraging people as aggressively as they can. They're trying to empower local school districts. The CDC is making the guidelines available, and I agree with you. I will retract my endorsement of Biden doing a mask mandate. I think you're right that caller was trying to get me to say that, and I fell for it.
Yeah, I think we can use much stronger language.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should call, what Republican politicians are doing for what it is, which is killing people with their policies.
Yeah.
And we should stop excusing politicians for killing people, but simply saying, oh, he's a politician.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get it. We just, starting tomorrow, we've got a mask mandate in all indoor spaces here in Oregon. And I'm guessing that more and more of those are going to be happening all across the country, particularly in states with, governors who are not idiots. Helena, thank you for the call. Thank you for a very thoughtful call. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at thomhartmann.com, I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now, and this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it, and that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. 23 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. And Dan in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How are you today?
Good. What's on your mind?
Good. Hey, nothing. So I actually wanted to talk about this infrastructure bill, if that's okay, for a little while.
Go for it.
I haven't heard much from the people that are not quite understanding. So Mitch McConnell came out today or yesterday and said that he was in favor of this bipartisan deal. I think that that's a flag to the Republicans in the House to vote for the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, overcome the progressives that are going to stand in the way of it, so thus making the progressives look like the bad guys again, and then they can use that to kill the $3.5 trillion plan, blow it out of the water. Even I feel like Sinema and Manchin are already doing that right now. They already said they're not going to support the $3.5 trillion. So I think that this is all I'm seeing everything line up like every other time progressives are kind of shoved under a bus for the Democratic Party. I think that they're going to be like, well, we need to put something through. Nancy's going to come out and be like, we need to put something through. They're going to vote for the bipartisan deal. The progressives are going to, stand their ground like they should. They're going to get that amount of people on the right to vote for this infrastructure deal. That's my guess, and that's not going to matter.
I agree, Dan, that's their strategy. it'll give them a scalp, as it were. It'll give them something. I guess that's a terrible old racist metaphor. It'll give them, my apologies. It'll give them something that they can take back to their voters and say, see, we're working for you, and all that sort of thing. And they can use it as to sabotage the $3.5 trillion bill. That said, if the Progressive Caucus holds firm, I'm guessing that there's not, I mean, you had a minority of Republicans in the Senate vote for this. If a minority of Republicans in the House vote for it, then the Progressive Caucus, if they hold firm, there's 100 members, more or less, to the Progressive Caucus, they will be able to force this. On the other hand, if you get a majority of Republicans in the House, then all bets are off. So, what we're watching here is a very fascinating game of three-dimensional chess, and it's going to be playing out right in front of us. But, Dan, I'm not discounting your scenario at all. I think you're onto something. Kent in Eagle Point, Oregon. Hey, Kent, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. Kudos to your staff and you for what you guys are doing. I want to talk about school district liability insurance. Okay. We have school districts throughout the state that the school boards are going against state, well, I don't want to call them state mandates, but state recommendations from their health department and so forth and so on. Now, does the company that provides the liability insurance against, drownings or things like that in locally owned school districts, are they going to put up with the bad decisions that the school boards make that aren't made of doctors, and they're not, they don't know. They're just doing what gets them votes, I think.
Yeah, this is the $64,000 question, Kent, is, A, when the vaccines are fully approved and when they're approved for kids, and B, how does that change the legal landscape of America? And then B, when parents, as kids start dying or being permanently disabled for the rest of their lives by long COVID, or at least for years by long COVID, we don't know yet, will their parents, who are their parents going to sue? Are they going to be suing DeSantis and Abbott? Are they going to be suing the school board? Are they going to be suing the school itself, the district? Are they going to be suing the principals? Are they going to do all of the above? Nobody knows right now. And to what extent might, the sovereign immunity defense be something that any of these organizations can use? And I think we're entering, entirely new territory here, Kent. And you're raising a really important question.
They're playing fast and loose with our tax dollars here in Oakland.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Fast and loose barely begins to describe it. Back with more of your calls. Well, actually, we've got a quick guest and then more, and then your calls just on the other side of this break.
Our book today is Future War, Preparing for the New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, L-A-T-I-F-F. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment, but unidentifiable as a national army, attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those of the past. They will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle but moderated by international conventions of behavior seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his
out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time. And that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Jimmy Tobias, an investigative journalist and contributing writer at The Guardian and a contributor to The Nation, The Intercept, and more. His most recent piece was published over at thenation.com, although you can also find his writings at jimmytobias.com. And James C. Tobias is his Twitter handle, and of course, The Nation, at The Nation. Jimmy, welcome back. Welcome to the program. Tell us about the collapse of the red wolves. These are animals that at one time, basically went from eastern Texas all the way up to Indiana, all the way down to the Gulf Coast, all the way over to the East Coast. And now there's this just little teeny tiny range of them along the Gulf Coast and in the upper East Coast, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the show. The red wolf is a distinct species, smaller than its larger cousin, the gray wolf. And it used to roam, as you said, across the South and much of the eastern seaboard. And by the mid-20th century, it was pretty much wiped out by persecution, poisoning, federal predator control efforts. But then after the Endangered Species Act was passed in 1973, the wolf was listed, and the government, the Fish and Wildlife Service, swooped in and saved the last 14 red wolves from the wild. They pulled them out of the wild, started a captive breeding program, and reintroduced them on the eastern coast of North Carolina at a place called the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. And from there, this reintroduction effort grew the population by tenfold. It was an enormous success. But then that program collapsed, and the government pulled the plug.
Which government, why, and when?
It was the federal government during the Obama administration that basically stopped the reintroduction effort. And since that time, the wolves have the wolf population in North Carolina has absolutely plummeted.
Why would they
and
do
now
that?
There's maybe, the Fish and Wildlife Service in recent decades has really been struggling to uphold the Endangered Species Act. It sort of often bends to powerful political interests. And in this case, there were some large, wealthy landowners, farmers, and North Carolina Republicans who just came after this program and wanted it to disappear. And the government basically folded to that pressure.
And you said I interrupted you in the middle of your thought there. What's the population now? It went from 14 to 140, and now it's back down to what?
Yeah, some say 7, some say 9, some say, maybe there's 20 wild wolves still on the landscape.
Wow.
So, it's kind of back where it started after decades and millions of dollars of efforts to save this species.
Now, I know Ted Nugent you were writing about this in your piece over at The Nation about how Ted Nugent was like, let's kill the wolves and all this kind of stuff. And it's become like an article of faith on the hard right to be macho by killing top predators. You've got the Trump children going over to Africa and the Himalayas killing, large animals. But do these wolves represent a threat to agriculture? I thought most, animal farming these days, for lack of a better phrase, was done as factory farms rather than grange fed. And even at that, I mean, do they represent a threat, or is this just, yahoos wanting to shoot something that's cool?
Yeah, I mean, I think, wolves and a lot of large predators have sort of become this culture war figure, and there's this fight over reintroduction efforts and species protection efforts all over the country. I think many on the right and many large industry groups see any kind of species protection as sometimes a form of like government tyranny or overreach, and so people really go after these programs. And of course, there are the occasional livestock, I'm sure, that's lost to wolves or other large predators. That certainly happens, but it's something more than that. I think there's sort of this it's almost become like a culture war across the country. I mean, it's not just in North Carolina; it's in the West, where wolves right now are being wolf programs are being attacked, ruthlessly by Republican legislatures. But really, in general, the Endangered Species Act is loathed by big industry groups and people on the right, and they'd love to see it disappear. And too often, the federal government, the agency responsible with enforcing it, the Fish and Wildlife Service, sort of bends to the pressures from these groups.
Is the Fish and Wildlife Service institutionally genuinely in favor of preserving endangered species that fall under their purview, or sort of like the Border Patrol? Are they only reluctantly going along with anything that doesn't comport with Republican politics?
Well, I mean, I have enormous respect for the Fish and Wildlife Service. It has done so much to protect and preserve the species of this country. And there are so many great people at the agency, but there has been a culture has taken root, I think, at the top levels of this agency, where people at the top are sort of apologetic for the mission that the agency is supposed to pursue, and there's sort of a weakness among the top leadership sometimes that you can see. And I think and this is not a partisan problem. I mean, the Fish and Wildlife Service has been struggling through both Democrat and Republican administrations for some time now.
So it's not a matter of with the post office, Trump installs some toady to go in there and wreak havoc like Louis DeJoy, and now the Biden administration's having trouble extracting them. This is far deeper, more systemic, and more long-term.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. And I think, you talk to many retired Fish and Wildlife Service people, and they'd really like to see, cultural change, reform at the agency, especially in this era where we're facing a growing global extinction crisis. We really need a strong Fish and Wildlife Service and a strong ESA if we're going to protect, the many, many imperiled species across this country.
So, Jimmy Tobias, for people who are listening to this conversation and would like to be proactive, would like to do something, would like to even make a phone call, what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing to know is that the Endangered Species Act has enormous support among the American public. I mean, it's something like 80% of the public supports this law. I mean, that's more than Congress, the courts, almost anything I can think of. And so the people support it, but it's at the, bureaucratic level, it's in the halls of power where this law is sort of being betrayed. And so I think if Americans make their voices heard about the species in their own backyards, about the species that they love, then a change could be made moving forward.
Yeah. So speak up to your elected officials. Get the word out there. Jimmy Tobias, JimmyTobias.com, TheNation.com for this brilliant piece warning the collapse of the red wolves should worry us over at The Nation. Jimmy, thank you. Thanks for the great work you're doing and for dropping by the program.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. We'll be right back. It's 43 minutes past the hour. Stick around, picking up your phone calls on the other side of this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls on our topics of the day. Are DeSantis and Abbott going to get away with this, do you think? And welcome back. Ed in Chicago. Hey, Ed, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
No, Tom, I got a question for you, kind of bookends with your guest from a little bit ago. My question is, do you think anybody in the top Democratic Party leadership will start using legitimate fear as a motivator to get out the base for 2022? And Republicans are always using fear to gin up their base, to get them to show up to vote. But for some reason, the Democratic Party have always I guess I go back to my question. I don't see them using legitimate fear as a motivator. And I think, we've gone from Lafayette Square to January 6th to states now passing laws to overturn elections. I think it's really time for the Democratic Party to start raising the flags, getting people out there, and by using fear as a motivator. Those of us who listen to you, we're talking to the base here. We know how close we are to losing our democracy, but I don't see anybody in the top leadership of the Democratic Party.
I'm hearing Joe Biden talk like this, Ed. I'm hearing all kinds of Democrats, pretty flipped out about it. And Schumer made a big point yesterday about how the first thing they're going to do when they come back in September is put voting legislation front and center. I'm guessing that he's got, a majority of his caucus willing to go along with a carve-out into the filibuster in order to allow for at least a slimmed-down voting rights bill that will block a lot of these Republican efforts.
Yeah, I guess. Well, I guess maybe it's just me then, because I'm just thinking when I see people on the talk show circuit on the Sunday morning shows and stuff, I don't get the sense of urgency from them. And my main concern is getting people to show up for 2022.
Right. Right.
And that's so anyway. But
that raises another question, Ed, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you think this is going to play out. I'm beginning to think, that in Texas and Florida and Georgia and states like this where they're passing these voter suppression laws, that the press has been, in prior elections, when Republicans passed laws like this, or when Brian Kemp purged over 1 million people from the voting rolls in Georgia just in time for his election against Stacey Abrams, which he won by only 50,000 votes, or when Ron DeSantis' Republican Party purged over 2 million votes in Florida in the couple of years leading up to that election that he won by 34,000 votes. I'm beginning to think that people in those states, because it's been just front and center in the news every day, calling it voter suppression. It used to be called, voter integrity or cleaning up the rolls or we had all these euphemisms that the Republicans used that the media went along with. The media is not going along with those euphemisms anymore. And I'm thinking that, and I'm guessing that the Democratic Party is betting on this, that enough people are going to be seriously pissed off that you're going to have massive voter turnout for the 2022 election. Let's say
that's my hope, but my hope is that the Democrats, instead of assuming that that's going to be the case, will create that case and legitimately so.
I'm with you.
I guess I just leave it at that. So.
Yeah. What's the old saying? Never assume it makes an ass of you and me. It's true. Ed, thank you for the call. It's we can't just live on a hope and a dream. We've got to fight for what's right. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? The last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Antonin Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Kevin in Long Beach, California. Hey, Kevin, thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Real quick, this is like the second time I called you, and the first time I called you was talking about we missed Ted Kennedy in the Senate because he's a lion and nobody's replaced him. So I think we need somebody like that today. But going forward, you mentioned about using the word killing, and you kind of rephrased it after that, but I think you're right on. You got to say the word killing out there. This is what they're doing. They know what they're doing. He's a lawyer. He graduated from Harvard and went to Yale Law School. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, he's no idiot.
Yeah, right. And so we need to use the word fascism because that's what's taking place.
Well, this goes beyond fascism. Violating public health policies, letting people die as a matter of policy. That's, in a much larger way, that's what Joe Stalin did when he allowed a famine that killed, 13 or 20 million Russians back, in the 40s or the early 50s. This is just a matter of scale. And but it's the same thing. It's allowing people to die as a matter of public policy. And who are the people who are dying, by the way? Who are the most likely people to be vaccinated in Texas and Florida? Upper middle class white people. So who's dying? Lower middle class and lower working class, mostly black and Hispanic people. And I think that, Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis are looking at that going, hey, this is good.
Well, I agree with that to a point, but I think now it's kids. And I think that's going to be the thing that really will take them down.
That's the thing. I predict that we are going to find out that the way that this virus, now I could, this is just speculation, right? And I'm no scientist, but just speculation. The old virus accessed the angiotensin receptor sites on the cells. Angiotensin is a hormone that the body produces that regulates blood pressure. It's why when people get to be my age, they end up on angiotensin ACE inhibitors and angiotensin blockers, ARBs drugs. And as you get older, you get more and more of these angiotensin receptor sites, or your body becomes more sensitive to it or something. I can't explain the mechanism. I don't understand it that well, but I know it has to do with that hormone. And I'm wondering if this disease doesn't, used to be it couldn't infect, and we had Dr. Eric Feigelding talking about this a week or 3 ago. It couldn't infect mice and rats, and it couldn't infect deer, presumably because they don't use angiotensin as the way of modulating their blood pressure. And again, I may be speaking complete gibberish here, please, but something is going on that's different with this Delta variant. Whether it's got a different way of getting into the cell and it doesn't require the angiotensin receptor sites, or whether it's much more efficient at getting into even marginal angiotensin receptor sites, or there's a combination of the three. We're now seeing it hit younger people, and we're now seeing it hit children. And I don't think that some of these Republican governors yet, it has fully sunk into them that it's not just the boomer remover, it's not just old people dying that they could put up with. I mean, you had Dan Patrick, I think the lieutenant governor of Texas, saying, I'm over 70, we should just be willing to lay down our lives for the economy. That was back during Trump. I don't think that dynamic is at work anymore. I think things have changed, whether it's whatever the biology of it is. I shouldn't speculate on the air about biology, but anyhow, we'll see.
It's happening, so we'll see. And these guys need to be stopped some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
so
I'm with you.
I think that using the word killing is apropos. I think it's what we need to do.
It's a very specific meaning, and I'm not quite there yet, but I'm close. Kevin, thank you for the call. Jeff in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Hope you're staying cool through our latest brutal heat wave.
Our building's AC died, and so they brought a room unit in for us. Thank God. So, it was getting hot in here.
I know what you went through last time.
Today.
Yeah. Well, Tom, let me ask, what's the big deal for red state America about having to wear a mask? Is it vanity or stupidity or both? You know, pre-vaccines, places like Taiwan, Hong Kong, South Korea, et cetera, they hardly had any deaths because they all wore masks. At the same time here, Donald Trump facilitated the unnecessary deaths of over 400,000 Americans by actively discouraging mask wearing. And I don't know if you saw it, Tom, but there's this TikTok video from it's Speak the Truth 101. It's gone viral. It's from this guy whose wife has breast cancer, and he believes she was prematurely discharged from the hospital because all the COVID patients coming in. And this guy's message to the unvaccinated is, hey, if you don't believe in science and medicine to the point where you won't get a life-saving vaccine, then why are you showing up at the hospital and taking beds from people like my wife? And, you know, Tom, you look at these people in Tennessee terrorizing these health professionals about mask wearing in schools, and yet these same nasty ignoramuses, they're going to be showing up in the hospital expecting these same health professionals to treat them and save their lives when they get COVID.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, just like that article you pointed out yesterday from the Susan Demis, I believe, in the Michigan Advance, isn't it time for us to stop coddling this kind of letting ignorance reign supreme in America?
Yeah, I mean, the debate, and I get this, and I saw the nurse that was on Rachel's show last night talking about how, you know, it's just absolutely overwhelming dealing with these people who said that they didn't believe in science when it was the vaccine, but now that they're really sick, they want science to save their lives. Please, please, please. Are they villains or are they victims? You know, are they victims of Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity and Fox so-called News and Donald Trump and the people who are lying to them? Or are they the villains? And I'm inclined to think that most of them are more victim than villains. Yeah, some friends of people that we sort of knew. Our son knew them really, really well. The woman was helped him buy a house. She was a real estate agent. She and her husband both were, you know, big Fox watchers, and they ended up getting COVID and dying. They were good people. They just were, you know, they were getting their information from friggin' liars. So.
Yeah, and of course I leave all the children out of everything I said. You know, yeah. I mean, obviously they're innocent, but you know, when they're going on the attack against public health officials, against teachers, against you know, governors. I mean, you know.
Well, I don't think those were parents in that video last night from Tennessee. I think those were generic Nazis.
Well, yeah.
And I think the thing was organized on Facebook, and I think Facebook needs to get some control over that. That wasn't just spontaneous. But anyhow, Jeff, I got to run. Thank you for the call. Always nice to hear from you. And my apologies to Diana and Paul and everybody else who didn't get through today. We'll be back tomorrow with Anything Goes Friday. Congressman O'Connor will be with us for an hour taking your calls. But other than that, it's Anything Goes Friday, so we'll see you then. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. And there are things you can do. There are things you can do from your couch. and they actually make a difference. So check out some of these organizations, these great organizations out there, and you know, make your phone calls, do your work, okay? Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. And if you're in the Pacific Northwest, stay safe.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.